Hello, I hope this story touches you to the core. Your feedback, suggestions, and subscriptions are always welcome. Laura stood at the kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee that had long since cooled. Her thoughts were circling around the memories of Brian, her husband who had passed away just a week ago. The whole house, filled with their history, now seemed empty and cold. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Laura slowly walked over and saw Brian's lawyer, Jack. He looked tense but friendly. "Laura, I've brought Brian's will. We need to talk about it," he said as he walked into the living room. Jack put a thick envelope on the table and pulled out several sheets. As you know, Brian made a will last year," he began, but Laura interrupted him. "Just tell me what's in it." Jack looked at her sadly. The will says that all of Brian's property goes to his sister, Jessica." Laura froze. She tried to understand what she was hearing, but the words seemed absurd. "What do you mean?" "Everything." She asked, feeling her voice breaking. Everything." Jack confirmed. "The house, the business, the bills." "There's been a mistake," Laura exclaimed, grabbing at the papers. "Brian couldn't have done this." Jack remained calm. "I checked everything twice. The will is officially notarized." Laura began flipping through the documents, looking for anything that might give her hope, but everything was clearly spelled out. "It's not true. Emma, he loved me. We were partners," she said, feeling tears filling her eyes. I don't know what happened, Laura," Jack said, "but maybe you should talk to Jessica." "Jessica?" Laura looked up sharply, and her voice was filled with anger. "She's always manipulated him." Laura sat down, trying to calm down. She remembered how Jessica had always found a way to influence Brian, even when it hurt their relationship. I'm not going to let this go," Laura said, her voice trembling but determined. Jack gathered the papers in silence. If you need my help, let me know," he said, leaving her alone. Laura remained sitting at the table, looking at the documents. Her heart was broken, but deep inside she felt a spark of determination. Laura sat in her living room holding the documents that would change her life. She tried to collect her thoughts, but her mind was raging. Why had Brian left everything to his sister? How would she be able to move on with her life now? Suddenly, the phone on the table vibrated. It was Laura's friend Alice. Laura, how are you?" she asked. How?" Laura laughed bitterly. "I just found out that my husband left everything to his sister and left me with nothing." Alice was silent for a few seconds. "I don't know what to say. But maybe you should talk to Jessica." A talk. Laura could barely contain her laughter. After everything she's done, Jessica, Brian's younger sister, had always been a difficult person. 'Cause she was good at charming people, but behind that mask she was a manipulator. She often asked Brian for money, arguing that she had problems, but Laura knew that the money was for her luxurious lifestyle. Alice was the only person Laura could confide in. They had been friends for many years, and it was Alice who had always supported her in difficult times. Laura, I think you need a plan," Alice said. "You need to find a lawyer. You need to check the will." I've already thought about it," Laura sighed. "But first I want to know why Brian did this." The next day, Laura decided to meet with Jessica. She called her, and Brian's sister answered with feigned joy. "Laura, how are you?" she said in a sweet voice. We need to talk," Laura replied firmly. They agreed to meet at a cafe in the city center. Jessica arrived a little late, dressed in a designer suit and carrying a luxurious bag. Laura felt her heart sink. "Well, what's wrong?" Jessica asked as she sat down at the table. You know what happened," Laura said, trying to control her anger. "Why did Brian leave everything to you?" Jessica smiled. "I guess he just trusted me more." Those words were like a knife in the heart. "Trusted me," Laura repeated. "He trusted me his whole life." "Really?" Jessica replied, her voice filled with sarcasm. "Then why does the will say otherwise?" Laura sensed that Jessica was hiding something. "What did you tell him?" she asked, leaning closer. "Why did he do that?" Laura, don't be ridiculous," Jessica replied. "It was his decision." Laura got up from the table. "When I'm going to find out the truth," she said. "Good luck," Jessica replied, smiling. As Laura left the cafe, she felt her anger mixing with determination. She knew something was wrong, and she would prove it. Laura stood in front her bedroom mirror, trying to calm herself. Her encounter with Jessica at the cafe had only confirmed her worst suspicions. Brian's sister was hiding something. Laura decided to take action, and as she dialed the number of Jack's lawyer, who had helped her with the paperwork, and made an appointment. Laura, if you suspect that Jessica was manipulating Brian, we need to find proof, Jack said when they met at his office. I'm sure she was influencing him, Laura replied. But how do we prove it? Jack offered to check Brian's financial transactions over the past year. A few days later, Laura received a report that shocked her. Brian had repeatedly transferred large sums of money to Jessica's account. "What is this?" she said, showing the documents to Alice, who came to support her. It looks like Jessica has been pulling money out of Brian's account for a long time, Alice replied. Laura decided to meet with Jessica immediately. She went to her house, a large mansion she had recently bought. What are you doing here?" Jessica asked in surprise when she opened the door. "We need to talk," Laura replied sharply. They walked into a spacious living room with expensive furniture. Laura sat down across from Jessica, who maintained her usual composure. "I know about the money," Laura began, showing the documents. "Brian has been transferring thousands of dollars to you." Jessica shrugged her shoulders. So what? He wanted to help me? Help? Laura raised her voice. "It sounds more like you were just using him. You don't understand," Jessica replied. "Brian offered me the money himself. He always wanted me to do well." You've always known how to manipulate him," Laura said, her emotions flaring. "You made him believe he couldn't live without you?" Jessica abruptly rose from her chair. "You know what, Laura?" She said, looking directly into her opponent's eyes. "Maybe Brian just didn't trust you." These words were the last straw. Laura got up and walked to the door. "And this isn't over," she said before walking out. Largo and on the street, Laura felt her anger mixing with determination. She knew the truth was out there, and she was ready to fight to the end. Laura returned home after a tense meeting with Jessica. Words were running through her head. Maybe Brian just didn't trust you. It was unfair. She knew she loved Brian and was faithful to him. Laura realized that there was no point in waiting any longer. If Jessica wouldn't tell the truth, she had to find it herself. The first thing Laura did was access Brian's bank statements. She connected to his online account using the password she knew from their time together. What do we have here?" she whispered as she scrolled through the transactions. Over the past few months, Brian had transferred tens of thousands of dollars to Jessica's account. Why would he do that? Laura wondered aloud. Then a payment labeled "Legal Services" caught her eye. Legal fees. Laura opened the transaction and noticed the name of the firm. It was the lawyer Brian had hired a few weeks before his death. Laura immediately wrote down the contact and decided to find out more. The next day, Laura met with a representative of the law firm. She showed her documents and asked for an explanation of the services provided to Brian. "Unfortunately, I can't disclose details," the lawyer said, looking at her. "But I'm his widow," Laura insisted. "I have a right to know why my husband left me with nothing." After a few minutes of tense silence, the lawyer sighed. "Brian consulted us about changing his will," he said. "He was very concerned." "Concerned about what?" Laura asked. He said that someone might try to take advantage of him financially," the lawyer answered cautiously. These words shocked Laura. "You mean me?" she asked. No. The lawyer shook his head. He was talking about someone in the family. Laura realized that Jessica might have been influencing Brian through his fears. She decided to find evidence of this. Laura remembered that Brian had an old friend, Tom, with whom they often played golf. She called him, hoping to find out more. Laura, Tom said when he met her at the cafe, "Brian has been really concerned lately." "About what?" She asked. He said Jessica kept asking him for money, but he was even more worried that she was threatening to reveal some of his secrets. This came as a surprise to Laura. "Secrets? What secrets?" she asked. He never talked about it directly," Tom replied, "but it seems like it was something that could seriously damage his reputation." Laura returned home, trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Jessica was clearly manipulating Brian by exploiting his fears. But what exactly did she know, and how did it affect his decision? Laura knew the truth was out there, but she needed hard evidence. Eminem actually felt that Jessica wasn't just influencing Brian, she may have falsified some of the documents to get what she wanted. She decided to start by checking the will itself. Laura turned again to Jack, who carefully studied the documents. Laura, have you noticed that the signature on this will looks a little strange? Jack asked, pointing to the final page. Laura leaned closer. Brian's signature seemed less clear than usual. It doesn't look like his usual signature, she said. He's always had a steady handwriting. Maybe it's the result of stress, Jack suggested, but we can check with a graphologist. A few days later, Laura received the results of the handwriting examination. The graphologist confirmed that the signature in the will was most likely a forgery. Laura, this is serious evidence, Jack said, looking at the report. If we can prove it in court, the will could be invalidated. Laura decided to find more evidence. She went back to Brian's financial transactions and noticed another strange detail. Large sums of money were being transferred to the account of the law firm that was handling the will. It looks like Jessica paid to have the will changed in her favor, Laura said, showing Jack the documents. We can file a formal request with the firm, he replied. Laura decided to confront Jessica with this evidence. She arrived at her house unannounced. Laura, you again? Jessica asked sarcastically as she opened the door. Yes, and this time I know the truth, Laura replied, walking into the living room. She put the documents on the table. You forged Brian's signature, Laura said, looking directly into Jessica's eyes. What are you talking about? Jessica smiled nervously, but her hands were shaking slightly. No, I have a graphology degree, Laura continued, and I know that you paid lawyers to change your will. Jessica tried to remain calm. You have no proof, she said. We'll see about that, Laura replied. I'm going to sue. Brian was always going to protect me, Jessica exclaimed, unable to stand the tension. Protect you? Laura raised her voice sharply. Protect you from what? From yourself. Jessica remained silent. Laura left the house, feeling that she was on the right track. She had proof, and now she knew how to proceed. Laura was ready to take the decisive step. She had all the evidence in her hands, the graphology results, the financial transactions, and the testimony of Brian's friends. She decided that she would no longer allow Jessica to avoid responsibility. She invited Jessica to a meeting at the house that had once been her home. Laura knew that this place would have a strong emotional impact on both parties. In the living room, which still bore traces of her past life with Brian, Laura spread out the documents on the table. She was waiting for Jessica to arrive. When Brian's sister walked into the house, she looked confident, but Laura noticed nervousness in her movements. What do you want, Laura? Jessica asked, sitting down across from her. I want you to hear the truth, Laura replied. Laura picked up the documents. This is a graphological examination, she began. It says that Brian's signature on the will was forged. Young Jessica's expression didn't change, but her fingers began to play nervously with the bracelet on her wrist. This doesn't prove anything, she said. And this, Laura held up the financial statements. It shows you getting money from Brian and then paying for legal fees. Jessica looked up and replied sharply, You don't understand! He wanted it that way! He wanted to leave me with nothing. Laura asked, her voice filled with pain. He wanted to protect me, Jessica exclaimed. From what? Laura moved closer to her. From me. Jessica finally broke down and confessing, Brian was afraid that you would leave him. He thought that if he left everything to me, you wouldn't be able to get his property. These words shocked Laura. Laura, that's not true. I would never leave him, she exclaimed. But he believed that, Jessica replied. I just helped him understand how to protect himself. Laura realized that Jessica was manipulating Brian's fears. But you took advantage of his weakness, she said, and now you think you've won. Jessica remained silent, but her eyes were guilty. Laura took the papers and walked to the door. This isn't over, Jessica. I will do everything to get the truth out. She left the house, leaving Jessica in silence. Laura sat on a park bench, holding documents that could change everything. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her heart was torn between two choices: fight for her inheritance or leave everything behind and start a new life. She remembered what Jack's lawyer had said the day before. Laura, you have every chance of winning this case, he had said, but it's going to be a long, hard road. Laura took a deep breath as she looked at the documents, as she realized that the legal battle could take months, possibly years. It meant a constant reminder of Brian, his death, and Jessica's betrayal. And is it worth it? She whispered, and her thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Alice, who sat down next to her. How are you, Laura? Her friend asked. I don't know, she answered honestly. I can't decide whether to keep fighting. Alice looked at her thoughtfully. Laura, I know how hard it is for you right now, but you have to ask yourself, what do you get out of this fight? I want justice, Laura replied. And what if that justice cost you peace? Alice asked. Laura was silent. She remembered the moments when she and Brian had been having their walks, their laughter, their dreams. But now it all seemed distant and overshadowed by his last decision. Maybe he was really afraid of losing me, Laura said, but doesn't justify what he did. Maybe it's time to think about yourself, Alice suggested. You've always put others first, and now you can start from scratch. But how? Laura asked. I have nothing. Alice smiled. You have yourself, and that's a lot. After much thought, Laura got up from the bench. I know what I have to do, she said. Are you sure? Alice asked. Laura. Yes. Laura nodded. I'm not going to let this situation define my life anymore. Laura decided not to file a lawsuit. She realized that fighting for her inheritance would only drag her back into a past that could not be changed. Instead, she decided to focus on building a new life. She returned home, gathered all the documents, and put them neatly in a box. This no longer controls me, she told herself. A few weeks passed after Laura decided to give up the fight for her inheritance. She started looking for a job, considering moving to another city. Her heart was still wounded, but she also had hope. One morning, as Laura was drinking coffee by the window, there was a knock at the door. She was surprised because she was not expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she saw Jessica. Brian's sister looked nothing like she used to. Her confidence had disappeared and her eyes were full of fear. What are you doing here? Laura asked, trying to contain her excitement. We need to talk, Jessica said quietly. Laura led her into the house. They sat down in the living room and Jessica began to talk. Laura, I know I made a mistake, she said, but you need to know the truth. What else do I need to know? Laura leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Jessica sighed. I didn't want to do this. But Brian, he made me sign these documents. These words shocked Laura. What do you mean? She asked. He was afraid you would leave him, Jessica said. He said that if you found out about his debts, you would leave. Debts? Laura felt herself getting dizzy. Jessica nodded. He owed a huge amount of money. The will was his way of protecting you from that. Laura felt her heart break. She had never suspected that Brian was having financial problems. Why didn't you tell me before? She asked, barely holding back her tears. I was afraid, Jessica admitted. I thought you would never forgive me. Laura was silent for a long time, trying to figure out how to react. She felt mixed emotions: anger, sadness, compassion. I don't know who to believe anymore, she finally said. Jessica left the house, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts. She stood at the window, watching Brian's sister get into the car and drive away. Was it really the truth, or was Jessica manipulating her again? Laura felt lost again, but this time she decided that she would not let the past determine her future. She took a notebook and started writing a plan for her new life. Thank you for watching. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts, and be sure to share what you would do in Laura's place. See you soon!